Emma's quiet life unravels when Max, her loyal dog, fiercely guards a mysterious attic box, sparking an unforgettable journey. Welcome to Pause Verve, like and share video with those who love dogs and their stories. Emma knelt in the attic of her small craftsman home, surrounded by the faint, musty scent of old cardboard and forgotten summers, her hands sorting through a tangle of Christmas lights and yellowed photo albums, when she first noticed the unmarked box tucked against the far wall. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight, streaming through a cracked skylight, casting a soft glow on Max, her 12-year-old golden retriever who lay sprawled on a faded rug, his muzzle graying, but his eyes still bright with the kind of loyalty that never fades. She had decided to tackle the attic this Saturday, a rare day free of work deadlines or errands, driven by a quiet urge to clear out the clutter that had piled up since she moved back to her childhood home 2 years ago. The box caught her eye, because it was plain, no labels or tape, just a sagging square of cardboard that looked like it had been forgotten for decades. She nudged it with her foot, testing its weight, and the corner crumpled under her sneaker, damp and soft, as if it had soaked up years of attic humidity. Trash, she thought, and reached to drag it toward the pile of discards, her flannel sleeve brushing against a cobweb. Max stirred, his head lifting from the rug, ears perked in a way that made her pause. He was usually content to watch her work, his tail thumping lazily whenever she tossed him a glance, but now his gaze locked onto the box, intense and unblinking, like he saw something she couldn't. Emma shrugged it off and gripped the box again, ready to haul it downstairs to the recycling bin, but before she could take a step, Max leapt to his feet with a speed she hadn't seen in years, his fur bristling, as he let out a low guttural growl that sent a jolt through her chest. She froze, hands still on the box, as Max positioned himself between her and the attic stairs, his lips curling just enough to show a flash of teeth, not in anger, but in warning. Emma's breath caught, and when she tugged the box closer, Max lunged, his teeth grazing her wrist in a quick nip that stung but didn't break the skin. She dropped the box, stumbling back, her heart pounding as she stared at her dog, who settled beside the box with one paw resting on its lid, his eyes fixed on her, steady and resolute. This wasn't Max, not the dog who once cowered at the sound of fireworks or backed away from a bold chipmunk in the backyard, his tail tucked in defeat. This was something else, a protector guarding a treasure she didn't understand. Emma's wrist throbbed faintly, more from surprise than pain, and she sank to her knees, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Max didn't move, his paw firm on the box, his growl fading to a soft whine as he tilted his head, almost pleading with her to listen. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her older brother Liam, who picked up on the second ring. Emma's voice spilled out, shaky but urgent. "Max just nipped me. He's never done that. It's this old box in the attic. He won't let me throw it out. He's guarding it like it's his job." Liam's voice came through, calm and steady, the way it always did when she was spiraling, and he asked if she was hurt, then listened as she described Max's strange behavior, the way his eyes hadn't left the box, the way he'd transformed from her gentle companion into something fierce and purposeful. "Maybe it's something Mum left behind," Liam said, his words landing like a stone in still water, rippling through Emma's thoughts. Their mother had passed 5 years ago, a sudden loss that left Emma and Liam grasping for pieces of her old recipes and faded sweaters. But the idea that Max, their mother's shadow in her final years, might be holding onto one of those pieces felt both impossible and undeniable. Emma ended the call, her gaze drifting back to Max, who hadn't budged, his golden fur catching the light like a quiet promise. She crawled closer, careful not to startle him, and sat a few feet away, her hands resting on her knees as she studied the box. It was ordinary, the kind you'd use to pack away books or winter clothes, but Max's devotion to it made it feel like a relic, something sacred buried in the attic's chaos. "What is it, buddy?" she whispered, her voice soft, almost afraid, to break the moment. Max's tail gave a single slow wag, and he nudged the box with his nose, his whine softening into something like encouragement. Emma's chest tightened with a mix of curiosity and trepidation, the weight of her mother's memory pressing against the edges of her heart. She thought of the days after the funeral, when she'd boxed up her mother's things in a fog of grief shoving them into the attic without looking too closely, afraid of what she might find. Had she packed this box herself, or had her mother hidden it here, knowing Max would one day lead her to it? The thought felt like a thread pulling her toward something she wasn't ready to face, but Max's steady gaze held her there, anchoring her to the moment. She reached out, her hand hovering over the box, and Max didn't growl this time, just watched her with eyes that seemed to say, "It's okay. You're supposed to see this." Emma's fingers brushed the cardboard, rough and cool under her touch, and she felt a spark of connection, not just to Max, but to the past she'd been too afraid to revisit. The attic was silent now, save for the faint creak of the house settling and Max's slow breathing, and Emma knew she couldn't walk away, not when her dog had risked everything to keep this box safe. She looked at Max, his paw still on the lid, and nodded as if sealing a pact between them. "Okay," she said, "let's find out what you're protecting." Emma sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the unmarked cardboard box resting between her and Max, its crumpled edges casting jagged shadows in the fading afternoon light. Her wrist still tingled from where Max's teeth had grazed her. Not painful, but a lingering reminder of his startling urgency, and she couldn't shake the image of her golden retriever's fierce determination, so unlike the dog who once tripped over his own tail chasing a butterfly. Max lay beside the box, his paw draped over it like a sentinel, his amber eyes flicking between her and the attic's clutter, as if daring her to try moving it again. The air felt heavy, thick with dust and the weight of Liam's words echoing in her mind. Maybe it's something Mom left behind. Emma's chest tightened at the thought of her mother, whose laughter once filled this house, now silent except for the creak of old wood and Max's soft breathing. She wanted to open the box, to unravel whatever secret had turned her gentle dog into a guardian, but fear held her back, a quiet dread that whatever was inside might pull her into memories she'd spent years avoiding. She leaned forward, her hands hovering over the box, and Max's ears twitched. But he didn't growl, just watched her with a steady gaze that felt like permission. Emma's fingers brushed the cardboard, cool and rough, and she hesitated, her mind racing with questions. What could be so important? Why would Max care? How could he know? She pulled her phone from her pocket and called Liam again, needing his calm voice to anchor her. Her words tumbled out. "Max is still guarding it. He's lying on it like it's his job. I don't know what to do." "What if it's nothing?" "What if it's everything?" Liam listened, his silence patient, then suggested she bring the box downstairs, set it somewhere safe, and let Max stay close. "Maybe he's trying to tell you something, Em. Dogs don't act like that for no reason." Emma nodded, though he couldn't see her, and ended the call, her gaze drifting back to Max, whose tail gave a slow thump against the rug, as if agreeing with Liam's advice. She stood, brushing dust from her jeans, and looked at the box, its plainness now a puzzle she couldn't ignore. "Okay, buddy," she said. "Let's take it downstairs, but you're coming with me." Max rose, his movements stiff but deliberate, and followed as she carefully lifted the box, its weight surprisingly light for the gravity it seemed to carry. The attic stairs creaked under her steps, and Max stayed close, his nose brushing her leg, guiding her like a shepherd. In the living room, she set the box on the coffee table, its worn edges stark against the polished wood, and Max settled beside it, his body pressed against the table's leg, his eyes never leaving her. Emma sank onto the couch, her mind a tangle of curiosity and apprehension, and she watched Max trying to read the story in his unwavering stare. She thought of her mother, who had loved Max as much as Emma did, always calling him her little shadow, the dog who'd curl up at her feet during late-night knitting sessions or follow her through the garden, tail wagging like a metronome. Had her mother hidden something in this box, knowing Max would protect it? The idea felt both absurd and profound, a secret message from a woman whose absence still ached like a bruise. Emma's fingers itched to peel open the flaps, but she held back, afraid of what she might find, afraid of what it might mean. She stood and paced the room, her sneakers soft against the hardwood, and Max's head followed her movements. His whine low and insistent, urging her to act. She stopped by the window, the late afternoon sun painting the lawn gold, and remembered the days after her mother's death, when she and Liam had sorted through her things, boxing up clothes and books. with mechanical efficiency, too raw to linger on the memories each item held. Had she overlooked this box in her grief, or had her mother placed it in the attic deliberately, trusting Max to lead her back? Emma turned to Max, who lifted his head, his graying muzzle catching the light, and she felt a surge of trust in him. Her companion, through countless childhood adventures and quiet nights. She knelt beside the table, her hand resting on Max's back, his fur warm and familiar, and spoke softly, "I don't know what's in there, but you do, don't you?" Max's tail thumped twice, and he nudged the box with his nose, a gentle push. That felt like encouragement. Emma's heart pounded, but she nodded as if sealing a pact and decided to wait, to let the moment settle before diving into whatever lay inside. She stood and grabbed Max's leash from the hook by the door, needing air to clear her head, and said, "Come on, let's walk, we'll figure this out together." Max rose slowly, his joints creaking, but his eyes were bright, and he followed her to the door, the box left untouched, but not forgotten. They stepped into the crisp spring evening, the neighborhood quiet except for the distant hum of a lawnmower, and Emma let Max lead, his pace steady as they wandered past blooming azaleas and picket fences. She watched him sniff the air, his tail wagging faintly, and felt a warmth spread through her, a reminder of the bond they'd shared since he was a puppy, tumbling into her life with floppy ears and endless curiosity. The walk calmed her, grounding her in the present, and she began to see Max's actions not as a mystery but as a gift, a chance to reconnect with something she'd lost. By the time they returned home, the sky had deepened to twilight, and the living room glowed with the soft light of a single lamp. Max padded to the coffee table and lay beside the box, his body relaxed but his eyes still watchful. Emma sat on the floor next to him, her hand resting on his head, and felt a quiet resolve settle over her. She wouldn't open the box tonight, not yet, but she would soon when she was ready to face whatever Max was guarding. For now she was content to sit with him, to let his presence steady her, to trust that he was leading her somewhere worth going. She leaned against the couch, her fingers tracing the soft fur behind Max's ears, and whispered, "You're my guide, aren't you? Always have been." Max let out a soft huff, his head settling onto her lap, and Emma smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of their journey. Emma woke to the soft patter of rain against the living room windows, the grey morning light filtering through the curtains and casting a gentle glow on Max, who lay curled beside the coffee table, his paw still touching the unmarked cardboard box as if he'd guarded it through the night. She stretched, her back stiff from sleeping on the couch, unwilling to leave Max's side after their walk the previous evening, when his quiet insistence had convinced her this box held something more than forgotten junk. The memory of his nip, his fierce growl, replayed in her mind, but now it felt less like a warning and more like a plea, a call to uncover a piece of the past Max refused to let her discard. She rubbed her eyes and knelt beside him, her hand resting on his warm fur, and watched his chest rise and fall, his graying muzzle twitching as he dreamed. The box sat on the table, its crumpled edges softened by the dim light, and Emma felt a pull, a quiet urgency to open it, tempered by the same fear that had kept her pacing last night. What if it's too much? What if it breaks me? Max stirred, his eyes blinking open, and he lifted his head, fixing her with a look that seemed to say, "It's time." Emma's heart thudded, but she nodded, trusting him as she always had, and reached for the box, her fingers trembling as she touched the rough cardboard. Max shifted closer, his nose brushing her arm, and she took a deep breath, peeling back the flaps with care, as if the box might crumble under her touch. The top opened with a faint crackle, revealing a layer of yellowed tissue paper, brittle and thin, and beneath it a folded quilt, its patchwork squares faded but vibrant with blues and greens, colors Emma hadn't seen since she was a child. Her breath caught, and she lifted the quilt gently, its weight familiar, stirring a memory of her mother draping it over her shoulders during winter nights, the two of them curled up with Max, reading stories by the fireplace. Max let out a soft whine, his tail thumping once, and Emma's eyes stung as she pressed the quilt to her chest, the scent of lavender and thyme washing over her. She set it aside and reached deeper, her fingers brushing something soft, a stuffed bear with one button, eye missing, its brown fur worn from years of being clutched in small hands. Emma laughed through a sob, recognizing it as her childhood companion, the bear she'd named Pudding, left behind when she outgrew such things. Max nudged the bear with his nose, his whine growing softer, and Emma held it up, marveling at how Max seemed to recognize it too, his eyes bright with something like memory. At the bottom of the box, nestled in a corner, was a small wooden box, no bigger than a book, its surface smooth and polished, unlike the rough cardboard that had hidden it. Emma's hands shook as she lifted it, her fingers tracing the simple latch, and Max sat up, his gaze locked on the box, his body tense with anticipation. She opened it slowly, the hinge creaking, and inside, cushioned on a scrap of velvet, was her mother's locket, a silver oval with a delicate floral engraving, the one Emma had searched for after the funeral, assuming it was lost in the chaos of those grief-soaked days. Her throat tightened, and she lifted the locket, its chain cool against her palm, and clicked it open to find a tiny photo of her and her mother, cheek to cheek, with Max's puppy face peeking into the frame, his tongue lolling in joy. Emma's vision blurred, tears spilling as she clutched the locket, the weight of her mother's absence crashing against the warmth of this discovery. Max leaned against her, his head resting on her knee, and she sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the realization that Max had known, had guarded this box because it held pieces of her mother, pieces Emma hadn't known she needed until now. She looked at Max, his eyes steady and kind, and whispered, "You remembered, didn't you? You kept her safe for me." Max's tail wagged slowly, and he licked her hand, a gesture so familiar it felt like a hug. Emma sat there for a long time, the quilt draped over her lap, the bear beside her, the locket in her hand, and let the memories flood back, her mother's voice singing lullabies, her hands stitching the quilt, her laughter as Max chased his tail in the backyard. The box wasn't just a collection of objects. It was a bridge to a time Emma had buried under years of routine and survival, a time when love was as simple as a dog's wag and a mother's smile. She thought of Liam's suggestion, that Max was trying to tell her something, and now she understood. He was guiding her back to her mother, to the love that had shaped her, even if she'd forgotten its shape. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at the box again, wondering what else it might hold, what other secrets Max had been protecting. She reached for her phone and texted Liam, "Found Mom's locket in the box. There's a quilt, and my old bear too." Max knew he's still watching it. Liam's reply came quickly, "Bring it to the kitchen, sit with it, let Max show you what's next." Emma stood, her legs shaky, and carried the box to the kitchen table, Max padding behind her, his steps slow but purposeful. She set the quilt and bear beside the locket, the wooden box open like a small shrine, and Max settled at her feet, his body pressed against her chair, his warmth a steady reminder of his presence. Emma's fingers lingered on the locket, and she felt a spark of courage, a desire to follow wherever Max was leading, to uncover the full story this box was telling. She looked down at him, his graying fur catching the morning light, and smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude for her dog, who had never stopped being her guide, even when she didn't know she needed one. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and Emma knew this was only the beginning, that Max's quiet insistence was pulling her towards something deeper, something that would stitch the past to the present in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Emma sat at the kitchen table, the patchwork quilt draped across her shoulders like a warm embrace, its faded blues and greens softening the stark morning light that spilled through the window. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on her slippers, his slow breaths a steady rhythm that grounded her as she stared at the open wooden box, the silver locket glinting softly beside the stuffed bear and the quilt's worn folds. The discovery of her mother's locket, her childhood bear, and the quilt had cracked open a door to the past, and now memories flooded through, vivid and sharp, each one tied to her mother's love and Max's unwavering presence. She ran her fingers over the locket's floral engraving, its cool metal warming under her touch, and felt her mother's absence like a physical weight, yet the objects before her seemed to pulse with her presence, as if she'd left them for Emma to find. When the time was right, Max lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting hers, and let out a soft whine, nudging her hand with his nose, a gesture so familiar it brought a smile through her tears. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his, and whispered, "You knew all along, didn't you? You've been holding on to her for me." Max's tail thumped once, slow and deliberate, and Emma's heart swelled, the bond between them deepening as she realized he wasn't just guarding a box, he was guiding her back to the love she'd tucked away in the years since her mother's death. She pulled the quilt tighter, its stitches rough under her fingers, and remembered winter evenings when her mother would wrap it around them both. Max curled at their feet, his puppy fur still soft and golden. They'd sit by the fireplace, her mother reading aloud from dog-eared books, her voice weaving tales of adventure, while Max's tail beat a quiet rhythm against the hearth. Emma could almost hear that voice now, low and warm, and she closed her eyes, letting the memory settle over her like dust. She thought of summer picnics in the backyard, her mother spreading the quilt under an oak tree, Max bounding between them, stealing bits of sandwich and flopping onto the quilt with a contented sigh. Those moments had felt endless then, but now they were fragments, precious and fleeting, and Emma's chest ached with the realization that she'd spent so long avoiding them, afraid of the pain they carried. Max shifted, his head settling back on her foot, and she opened her eyes, looking at the bear, its single button eye staring back like an old friend. She picked it up, its fur worn from nights spent clutched against her chest, and remembered how her mother would tuck it beside her at bedtime, whispering, "Pudding will keep you safe until morning." Max had been there too, a puppy then, sleeping at the foot of her bed, his warmth a constant reassurance. Emma laughed softly, wiping her eyes, and held the bear out to Max, who sniffed it and gave a low huff, as if recalling those nights himself. The locket drew her attention again, and she opened it, studying the tiny photo inside, her mother's smile wide and bright, her own younger face pressed close, Max's puppy grin stealing the frame. She traced the photo with her thumb, her throat tight, and felt a surge of gratitude for Max, who had preserved this connection when she'd been too lost in grief to do it herself. She thought of the days after her mother's funeral, when she and Liam had moved through the house like ghosts, packing away her mother's life in boxes, too raw to linger on the memories each item held. Emma had pushed the pain down, focusing on work, on routine, on anything but the hole her mother left behind. But Max had stayed steady, his quiet presence a reminder of the love that hadn't gone anywhere. Now, sitting here with the quilt, the bear and the locket, she saw that love clearly, woven into every stitch, every worn thread, every moment Max had guarded. She stood and walked to the living room, Max following with slow, careful steps, and spread the quilt on the couch, inviting him to climb up beside her. He hesitated, his joints stiff, but with a gentle nudge he settled onto the quilt, his body warm against her side, and Emma wrapped an arm around him, the locket still clutched in her hand. She leaned back, letting the quiet of the house envelop them, and began to talk, her voice soft but steady, telling Max about the memories that were surfacing, the way her mother used to sing off-key while baking, the way she'd braid Emma's hair before school, always sneaking in a silly joke to make her laugh. Max listened, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow, and Emma felt a connection to her mother that was stronger than it had been in years, as if Max was a bridge between then and now, carrying her mother's love across time. She thought of Liam's words, "Let Max show you what's next," and realized this was what he meant, not just finding objects, but rediscovering the heart of who she was, the girl her mother had raised, the girl Max had never stopped believing in. Emma's tears fell freely now, but they weren't heavy. They were release, gratitude, love, and she buried her face in Max's fur, whispering, "Thank you, buddy, for bringing her back." Max let out a soft grunt, his tail wagging faintly, and Emma laughed, the sound light and clear cutting through the morning stillness. She looked at the wooden box on the table, wondering what else it might hold, but for now she was content to sit here, wrapped in the quilt, with Max and the locket, letting the memories wash over her. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the room gold, and Emma felt a quiet certainty that this journey, whatever it was far from over. Max's head rested on her lap, his warmth anchoring her, and she knew he'd lead her to the next piece of the puzzle, just as he'd led her to this one. She stroked his fur, her fingers lingering behind his ears, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years, a sense that her mother was still with her, in the quilt, in the locket, in Max's steady heart. The day stretched ahead, full of possibilities, and Emma was ready to follow wherever her dog took her next. Emma sat on the couch, the patchwork quilt draped over her lap, Max's head resting heavily on her knee as the morning sun filtered through the living room windows, casting warm stripes across the hardwood floor. The locket lay open in her palm, its tiny photo of her mother herself and a puppy Max glowing like a captured star. And the stuffed bear, Pudding, sat propped against the couch arm, its single button eye watching her with quiet familiarity. The wooden box from the attic rested on the coffee table, its contents, the quilt, the locket, the bear, spread out like pieces of a map Emma was only beginning to understand. Max's steady breathing anchored her, his greying fur warm under her hand, and she felt a shift inside, a readiness to follow the thread he'd tugged loose to uncover whatever else he was guarding. She leaned forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the wooden box, and noticed something she'd missed in the rush of yesterday's discovery, a folded piece of paper tucked into the velvet lining, its edges yellowed but intact. Max lifted, his head, his eyes bright with anticipation, and Emma's pulse quickened as she pulled the paper free, unfolding it carefully, as if it might dissolve under her touch. The handwriting was her mother's, looping and familiar, and the words hit her like a soft wave. "To my Emma, if you're reading this, it means Max has led you here. Follow him to the place where we watch the stars. You'll know it when you see it. Love always, Mum." Emma's breath caught, and she read the note again, her mother's voice echoing in her mind, warm and clear, guiding her as it had when she was a child. "The place where we watch the stars," she whispered, and an image surfaced: Lake Willow, a quiet campground an hour's drive north, where her mother had taken her and Max for summer weekends, spreading blankets under the night sky to trace constellations with a flashlight. Emma looked at Max, who tilted his head, his tail thumping once against the couch, and she smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of longing and excitement. "You know where we're going, don't you, buddy?" She stood, the quilt sliding to the floor, and Max rose with her, his movement slow but purposeful, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Emma grabbed her phone and texted Liam. "Found a note from Mom. It says to go to Lake Willow. Max is practically pointing the way. I'm taking him there today." Liam's reply was quick. "Go for it, Em. Max knows what he's doing. Call me when you get back." Emma tucked the note into her pocket, gathered the locket, bear, and quilt, and placed them carefully in a canvas bag, not wanting to leave them behind, even for a day. She packed a water bottle, Max's favorite treats, and a blanket for the car, then clipped his leash to his collar, though she knew he'd stay close. Max padded to the front door, his tail wagging with a quiet energy, and Emma followed, her sneakers soft against the floor, her mind buzzing with the promise of what they might find. The drive to Lake Willow was peaceful, the highway flanked by rolling fields and budding trees, the spring air crisp through the open windows. Max sat in the passenger seat, his nose twitching at the breeze, his eyes bright and alert, and Emma glanced at him, marveling at how he seemed to sense the importance of this trip, his usual sleepiness replaced by a focused calm. She turned on the radio, letting soft folk tunes fill the car, and sang along quietly, her voice blending with the hum of the engine, a habit her mother had loved, always teasing Emma for her off-key notes. The memory made her smile, and she reached over to scratch Max's ears, whispering, "We're going to find something special, aren't we?" Max huffed, his tail brushing the seat, and Emma's anticipation grew, tempered by a flicker of doubt. What if it's nothing? What if I'm chasing ghosts? But Max's steady presence pushed the doubt aside, his trust in her as unshakable as hers in him. They reached Lake Willow just before noon, the campground's wooden sign weathered but welcoming, its letters carved deep with the promise of quiet nights and starlit skies. Emma parked near the trailhead, the lake shimmering in the distance, its surface catching the sunlight like a mirror. Max jumped down from the car, his leash trailing behind him, and trotted toward a familiar path, his steps sure despite his age. Emma followed, the canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her heart pounding as they wound through tall pines and wildflowers, the air rich with the scent of earth and water. Max led her to a clearing she remembered, a wide, grassy space bordered by a massive oak tree, its branches stretching like arms toward the sky. This was it, the place where they'd lain on blankets, her mother pointing out Orion's belt and the Big Dipper, Max sprawled beside them, chasing fireflies with lazy swipes of his paw. Emma's throat tightened, and she knelt beside Max, who sat by the oak, his nose sniffing the ground near its roots. She brushed away leaves and dirt, her fingers grazing something hard, a small tin box, rusted but intact, buried shallowly in the earth. Emma's hands shook as she pried it open. Max, watching closely, his tail wagging faintly. Inside was a folded star chart, its edges creased but the ink still vivid, mapping the constellations her mother had taught her, and beneath it, another note in her mother's handwriting, Emma. You always loved the stars. Keep looking up, there's more to find. Follow Max. He knows the way. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched the chart to her chest, the paper crinkling against her jacket. Max leaned against her, his warmth steadying her, and she laughed through her sobs. You brought me here, buddy. You remembered. She sat back on the grass, the lake sparkling in the distance, and spread the star chart on her lap, tracing the lines her mother had drawn, each one a memory of those nights when the world felt infinite. Max lay beside her, his head on her knee, and Emma felt a surge of purpose, a certainty that this was only the first step, that Max was leading her through a journey her mother had planned, a trail of love and memory woven into the places they'd shared. She looked at the note again. Follow Max, he knows the way, and nodded, her resolve hardening, ready to trust her dog wherever he took her next. Emma sat in the grassy clearing by Lake Willow, the star chart spread across her lap, its constellation, lines tracing memories of her mother's voice under a vast night sky, while Max rested his head on her knee, his golden fur warm against her jeans. The tin box lay open beside her, its note, Follow Max, he knows the way, tucked safely in her pocket, a quiet promise that this journey, sparked by Max's fierce protection of a cardboard box, was only beginning. The lake shimmered in the afternoon, light, its ripples catching the sun, and Emma felt a spark of purpose ignite, a certainty that her mother had left these clues for her, woven into the places they'd loved, with Max as her guide. She stroked his ears, whispering, You're leading me somewhere, aren't you, buddy? Somewhere Mom wanted me to go. Max's tail thumped softly, his eyes bright despite the grey in his muzzle, and Emma smiled, her heart swelling with trust in her dog, who seemed to carry her mother's love in every steady step. She gathered the star chart and tin, placing them in her canvas bag alongside the locket, quilt and bear, and stood, brushing grass from her knees. Max rose with her, his movements slow but deliberate, and led the way back to the car, his leash trailing loosely as he navigated the pine-lined path with quiet confidence. Emma followed, the weight of the bag comforting, a tangible link to the past she was rediscovering, and as they reached the car, she glanced back at the clearing, the oak tree standing like a sentinel, guarding the memory of those starlit nights. She opened the passenger door for Max, who climbed in with a huff, settling onto the blanket she'd spread for him, and Emma slid into the driver's seat, her hands lingering on the steering wheel as she considered their next move. The note's words echoed, Follow Max, and she knew he'd show her the way, but the star chart offered no further clues, no map to the next destination. She pulled the note from her pocket, rereading it, hoping for a hint, and noticed a faint smudge of ink on the corner, a tiny doodle of a dancer mid-twirl, so small she'd overlooked it before. Her breath caught, and a memory surfaced, her mother teaching dance classes at the community center in town, spinning across the wooden floor. With a grace Emma had always envied, Max sprawled in the corner, watching with a wagging tail. The place where we danced in the rain, Emma whispered, recalling a stormy afternoon when her mother had pulled her outside the center, twirling her in the downpour, Max barking and splashing beside them. She looked at Max, who tilted his head, his eyes seeming to confirm her guess, and she nodded, starting the engine. Okay, buddy, let's go to the community center. Let's see what you find there. The drive back to town was quiet, the radio off, The only sounds the hum of the engine and Max's soft breaths, his nose pressed to the cracked window, sniffing the spring air. Emma's mind wandered, piecing together the fragments of her mother's life, the way she'd poured love into small moments, dance classes, camping trips, quilts stitched by hand. She thought of Max, a puppy then, always at her mother's side, his loyalty a constant through the years, even after her mother's sudden passing, a heart attack that stole her too soon. Emma's throat tightened, but the pain felt softer now, woven with gratitude for Max, who was helping her reclaim what she thought was lost. They reached the community center, just as the sun dipped low, painting the brick building gold, its wide windows reflecting the fading light. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars, and Emma parked close to the entrance, her heart pounding with anticipation. Max jumped down, his leash trailing, and trotted to the front doors, his tail wagging with a quiet purpose that made Emma's chest ache with love. She followed, pushing open the doors to a familiar lobby, the air scented with polish and old wood, and a receptionist looked up, smiling at Max, who padded straight past, heading for the hallway that led to the dance studio. Emma's sneakers squeaked on the floor as she hurried to keep up, her bag bouncing against her hip, and she marveled at Max's certainty, the way he moved like he'd walked this path yesterday, not years ago. The studio doors were propped open, and Max slipped inside, his claws clicking softly on the polished floor. The room was empty, its mirrors reflecting the late-day light, and Emma paused, memories flooding back, her mother leading a class, her laughter echoing, Max napping. In the corner on a folded blanket, Max didn't hesitate. He crossed the room to a storage closet in the far corner, one Emma remembered her mother using for props and costumes, and sat, his nose sniffing the base of the door. Emma's pulse raced, and she knelt beside him, whispering, "What's in there, buddy? What did Mom leave?" Max whined, his paw scratching lightly at the door, and Emma opened it, revealing shelves of folded mats and bins of scarves. But Max's attention was on the floor, a loose baseboard that looked slightly askew. She tugged at it, her fingers catching the edge, and it came free, revealing a small hollow space containing a leather-bound photo album, its cover embossed with a single star. Emma's hands shook as she lifted it, Max pressing close, his warmth steadying her, and she opened the album to find pages of photos, her mother dancing, Emma as a child twirling beside her, Max sprawled nearby, his puppy grin wide. Tucked between the pages was another note, "Emma, you are my favorite dance partner. Keep following Max, he'll show you the next step, love, Mom." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she sank to the floor, the album in her lap, Max's head resting against her arm. She flipped through the photos, each one a snapshot of joy, and felt her mother's love wrap around her, as tangible as the quilt in her bag. Max let out a soft huff, his tail wagging faintly, and Emma laughed, wiping her eyes. "You're amazing, you know that. You're bringing her back to me." She clutched the album, the note's words sinking in, "Keep following Max," and knew this was just the start, that her dog was leading her through a tapestry of memories her mother had carefully stitched together. The studio was quiet, the light fading, and Emma stood, the album tucked under her arm, ready to follow Max wherever he took her next, her heart full of love and possibility. Emma stood in the community center's dance studio, the leather-bound photo album clutched to her chest, its pages filled with snapshots of her mother's graceful spins and her own clumsy childhood twirls, Max's puppy face peeking into nearly every frame. The note tucked inside, "Keep following Max, he'll show you the next step," burned in her mind, its words a gentle push from her mother, guiding her through a journey that felt both sacred and urgent. Max sat beside her, his golden fur catching the studio's fading light, his eyes fixed on her with a quiet certainty that steadied her racing heart. The storage closet's loose baseboard lay on the floor, its hidden compartment now empty, but the album in her hands was a treasure, each photo a thread tying her to the mother she'd lost 5 years ago. Emma's fingers traced the embossed star on the album's cover, and she knelt beside Max, whispering, "You found this, buddy. What's next? Where are we going?" Max's tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, and he nudged her hand, his nose warm against her skin, as if urging her to look closer. She opened the album again, flipping past photos of dance recitals and rainy afternoons until she reached the final page, where a single Polaroid was taped, her mother standing outside the town library, a stack of books in her arms, Max at her side, his leash tangled around her ankle. Beneath the photo, in her mother's looping handwriting, was a line: "The library holds stories ours and others ask Max to show you." Emma's breath hitched, and she remembered her mother's volunteer shifts at the library, shelving books and reading to children. Max curled up in a corner, charming every patron with his wagging tail. "The library," she said, her voice soft but firm. "That's where you're taking me, isn't it?" Max stood, his joints creaking, and padded toward the studio door, glancing back to make sure she followed. Emma tucked the album into her canvas bag, alongside the quilt, locket, bear, and star chart, and grabbed Max's leash, her heart pounding with anticipation. They stepped into the evening air, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and drove the short distance to the library, its brick facade glowing under streetlights, a beacon of quiet stories waiting to be uncovered. Max leapt from the car with a spark of energy, his nose sniffing the air, and trotted to the library's entrance, his leash trailing behind him. Emma pushed open the heavy doors, the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood washing over her, and a librarian looked up, smiling at Max, who ignored the attention and headed straight for the back of the main room, where a carved wooden bookshelf stood against the wall. Emma's pulse raced as she followed, memories flooding back, her mother sorting books here, humming softly, Max napping nearby, his snores a gentle counterpoint to the library's hush. Max stopped at the bookshelf, his nose sniffing a lower shelf, and sat, his paw tapping the floor as if pointing. Emma knelt, her fingers brushing the spines of worn novels, until she noticed a book slightly askew, its cover plain, no title or author, just a faint star etched into the leather. She pulled it free, her hands trembling, and opened it to find not a book but a hollowed-out compartment, holding a small journal, its pages filled with her mother's handwriting. Max whined, his tail wagging faintly, and Emma sank to the floor, the journal in her lap, her eyes scanning the first entry. "Emma, you were always my dreamer. This is for you, to remember who you are and who you'll become." The words hit like a warm tide, and Emma flipped through the pages, each one a letter to her written in the months before her mother's death, recounting dreams they'd shared, hopes her mother had for her, moments Emma had forgotten, like the time she'd declared she'd be an astronaut, or the night she and Max slept in a backyard tent, giggling until dawn. Tucked between the pages was another note: "To the place where waves sing, Max knows, trust him." Emma's heart leapt. "The beach house," she whispered, recalling summers at their family's small cottage by the shore, where her mother taught her to listen to the ocean's rhythm, Max chasing waves with boundless joy. She looked at Max, who tilted his head, his eyes bright with recognition, and she laughed, tears spilling. "You're incredible. You're piecing it all together for me." The librarian approached, curious, and Emma explained, her voice shaky. "My mom left this here. She used to volunteer. Max led me to it." The librarian's eyes softened, and she nodded. "Your mother was special. She always said Max was her little helper. I'm not surprised he brought you here." Emma thanked her, clutching the journal, and led Max back to the car, the night air cool against her skin. She spread the quilt over Max in the passenger seat, his warmth a comfort, and drove home, her mind buzzing with the journal's words, her mother's hopes for her future, her love woven into every sentence. At home, she sat at the kitchen table, the journal open, Max curled at her feet and read until midnight, each entry a window into her mother's heart, a reminder of the dreams Emma had let fade in the grind of daily life. She thought of the beach house, its weathered porch overlooking the sea, and knew that's where Max would take her next, to the place where waves sing, where another piece of her mother waited. Emma's fingers lingered on the journal, and she felt a surge of gratitude for Max, who had carried her mother's love through time, guiding her with a loyalty that never wavered. She leaned down, pressing her cheek to his fur, and whispered, "You're my compass, buddy, always pointing me home." Max huffed, his tail thumping, and Emma smiled, the weight of the journey settling into something lighter, something hopeful. She stood, tucking the journal into her bag, and glanced at the clock. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go to the beach house, you and me, just like old times." Max lifted his head, his eyes gleaming, and Emma knew he was ready, his heart as steady as ever, leading her through a tapestry of memories her mother had left behind. The house was quiet, the night deep, and Emma lay on the couch, Max beside her, the quilt over them both, her mind alive with the promise of what they'd find next, her mother's love a guiding star, and Max its faithful keeper. Emma woke to the soft glow of dawn seeping through the living room curtains. Max curled beside her on the couch, his head nestled against her arm, the patchwork quilt draped over them both like a shield against the morning chill. The journal from the library lay open on the coffee table, its pages filled with her mother's handwritten letters, each one a glimpse into dreams and moments Emma had let slip in the years since her mother's death. The note tucked inside, "To the place where waves sing, Max knows, trust him," pulsed in her mind, pointing to the family's beach house, a weathered cottage where summers were spent chasing waves and building sandcastles. Max always at their side. She ran her fingers through Max's fur, his greying muzzle warm under her touch, and felt a mix of anticipation and unease, the journey he was leading her on, growing richer with each clue, but also heavier, as if each discovery peeled back another layer of her grief. Max stirred, his eyes blinking open, and he let out a soft huff, nudging her hand, his tail wagging faintly, as if to say, "We're not done yet." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with love for her dog, who seemed to carry her mother's intentions. With every purposeful step, but a quiet doubt lingered. What if the beach house holds something I'm not ready to face? What if it's more than I can bear? She pushed the thought aside, trusting Max's steady gaze, and stood, folding the quilt and placing the journal in her canvas bag alongside the locket, bear, star chart, and photo album. Max padded to the kitchen, his claws clicking on the hardwood, and Emma followed, brewing coffee and sharing a scrambled egg with him, their morning ritual a small anchor in the unfolding mystery. She grabbed his leash, packed water, treats, and a blanket, and opened the front door. Max trotting out with a spark of energy, his nose sniffing the crisp spring air. The drive to the beach house was 2 hours, the road winding through pine forests and past salt marshes, the ocean's scent growing stronger as they neared the coast. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, ears flapping, and Emma laughed, the sight of his joy easing the knot in her chest. She thought of her mother, who loved these drives, singing folk songs and pointing out herons in the reeds, Max's puppy barks joining the chorus. The memory warmed her, but it also sharpened the ache of her absence, and Emma wondered how she'd let so much of her mother fade, buried under work and routine, until Max's fierce protection of that attic box pulled her back. They reached the beach house by mid-morning, its grey shingles weathered but sturdy, the porch overlooking a stretch of dunes where waves crashed in a steady rhythm. Max leapt from the car, his leash trailing, and bounded toward the porch, his step slower than in his puppy days, but driven by the same excitement. Emma followed, the canvas bag slung over her shoulder, and unlocked the door, the familiar creak of hinges stirring memories of summers spent here, her mother's laughter echoing through the salt-stained walls. The house smelled of cedar and sea, its furniture draped in dust sheets, and Max didn't linger inside, heading straight for the back door that led to the beach. Emma opened it, and he trotted out, his nose to the ground, leading her past the dunes to a weathered wooden bench tucked against a low cliff, where her mother used to sit, sketching the ocean. Max stopped, sniffing the base of the bench, and sat, his paw tapping the sand, his eyes fixed on her. Emma's heart raced, and she knelt, brushing away sand to reveal a small waterproof case, its edges sealed with tape. She pried it open. Max, pressing close, and found a VHS tape inside, labeled in her mother's handwriting for Emma with love. Her throat tightened, and she clutched the tape, memories flooding back, her mother filming family moments with an old camcorder, Max tumbling into frames with his boundless energy. There was no note this time, but the tape felt like a direct line to her mother, a voice Emma hadn't heard in years. She looked at Max, who whined softly, his tail wagging, and whispered, "You knew this was here, didn't you? You're putting it all together." Back inside, Emma rummaged through the house, finding an old VCR in a closet, its cords tangled but intact. She connected it to the TV, her hands shaking, and slid the tape in, Max curling up beside her on the couch, his warmth a steady comfort. The screen flickered, and her mother's face appeared radiant and alive, standing on the beach, the wind tugging at her hair. She spoke directly to Emma, her voice soft but clear. "Emma, my dreamer, if you're watching this, Max brought you. Here I knew he would. This is for you. To remind you to keep chasing what lights you up. I'm so proud of you always." The tape cut to clips of their summers, Emma building sandcastles, her mother teaching her to skip stones, Max chasing waves, his barks blending with their laughter. Emma's tears fell freely, and she clutched Max, her sobs mingling with a deep gratitude for this moment, for her mother's voice filling the room again. The tape ended with her mother's smile, and Emma sat in silence, the ocean's rhythm outside mirroring her heartbeat. She thought of the journal's letters, the star chart, the locket, each clue a piece of her mother's love, but this tape was different. It was her mother speaking to her now, bridging the years with words Emma hadn't known she needed. Max rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed, and Emma realized the mystery was deepening not just in the clues but in what they revealed about her mother's heart, her unwavering belief in Emma's potential. She felt a pang of guilt for letting that belief fade, for letting grief dim her own dreams. But Max's presence, his steady guidance, was a reminder that it wasn't too late to reclaim them. She stood, the tape still in her hand, and looked out at the ocean, the waves singing as her mother's note had promised. Max followed, his tail wagging, and Emma knew the journey wasn't over, that her mother had left more for her to find, with Max as her faithful guide. She whispered, "Let's keep going, buddy, show me what's next." And Max huffed, his eyes bright, ready to lead her deeper into the tapestry of love and memory her mother had woven. Emma sat on the beach house couch, the VHS tape resting in her lap, its images of her mother's smile and the sound of her voice still echoing in her mind, a vivid bridge to a past she'd thought was lost. Max lay beside her, his head pressed against her thigh, his slow breaths a steady anchor as the ocean's waves sang outside, their rhythm a soft echo of her mother's note, "To the place where waves sing." The canvas bag sat on the floor, brimming, with treasures, the quilt, locket, bear, star chart, photo album, journal, and now the tape. Each one a piece of her mother's love, carefully hidden for Emma to find, with Max as her unwavering guide. The weight of the journey pressed against her chest, not just the joy of rediscovery, but a growing ache, a guilt that she'd let her mother's memory fade, burying it under years of routine and survival after her sudden death. She stroked Max's fur, his graying muzzle warm under her fingers, and whispered, "You never forgot her, buddy. You kept her close when I couldn't." Max's tail thumped faintly, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet reassurance, but Emma's heart twisted, the stakes of this journey rising as she realized each clue wasn't just a gift. It was a call to confront the grief she'd sidestepped, to reclaim the dreams her mother had nurtured in her. She stood, pacing the small living room, the tape in her hand, and felt the walls of the beach house close in, its salt-stained boards holding memories of summers when she'd felt boundless, her mother's laughter a constant, Max's puppy bounds a joyful chaos. Now those moments felt distant, and Emma wondered how she'd drifted so far from the girl who danced in the waves, who dreamed of writing stories that touched the world, dreams her mother had cherished in the journal's letters. Max rose, his joints creaking, and padded to her side, nudging her hand, his whine soft but insistent as if sensing her turmoil. Emma knelt, pressing her forehead to his, and whispered, "I'm scared, Max. What if I let her down? What if I've lost too much?" Max licked her cheek, his warmth pulling her back, and she laughed through tears, his loyalty a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. She returned to the couch, opening the journal to reread her mother's words. "Emma, you were always my dreamer. Don't let the world dim your light," and felt a pang of shame for the years she'd spent in a safe but uninspired job, her writing dreams pushed to the margins, her mother's belief in her tucked away like the objects Max was now uncovering. The tape had ended with her mother's voice, "I'm so proud of you always," and Emma clung to those words, but they also stung, a reminder of the gap between who she'd been and who she was now. Max settled at her feet, his eyes never leaving her, and she thought of his fierce protection of the attic box, his steady guidance to the lake, the library, the beach house, each step a testament to his faith in her, in the journey her mother had planned. She picked up the tape, searching for another clue, and noticed a small label on the case's edge in tiny script. "To the garden where we grew, Max will lead you." Emma's breath caught. "The garden," she whispered, picturing the community garden in town where her mother had tended vegetables and flowers, teaching Emma to plant seeds, Max digging holes with more enthusiasm than skill. It was a place of growth, of patience, and Emma felt a surge of certainty that Max would take her there next, to another piece of her mother's legacy. She stood, tucking the tape into her bag, and looked at Max, who tilted his head, his tail wagging, ready for the next step. Emma's heart pounded, not just with anticipation but with the weight of what this journey was asking of her, to face the guilt of drifting from her mother's memory, to rediscover the dreams she'd let go, to honor the love Max was so fiercely protecting. She grabbed his leash, though he didn't need it, and packed the car, the quilt spread over the passenger seat for Max's comfort. The drive back to town was quiet, the coastal road giving way to rolling hills, the spring air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. Max sat alert, his nose to the window, and Emma glanced at him, marveling at his resilience, his 12 years showing in his slow steps, but not in his spirit. She thought of the journal's letters, her mother's hopes for her to live boldly, and felt a flicker of resolve, a desire to bridge the gap between the girl she'd been and the woman she could become. The community garden was on the edge of town, its wooden gate painted with sunflowers, and Emma parked nearby, her heart racing as Max leapt down, his leash trailing, and trotted to the gate, his nose sniffing the air with purpose. The garden was quiet, its beds bursting with early vegetables and wildflowers, and Max led her down a gravel path to a corner plot, where a small stone bench sat under a trellis of climbing roses. Emma's throat tightened, remembering her mother kneeling here, hands in the soil. Max sprawled nearby, his fur dusted with dirt. Max stopped at the bench, his paw tapping the ground, and Emma knelt, brushing away leaves to reveal a buried tin, its lid etched with a flower. She opened it, her hands trembling, and found a packet of seeds, marigolds, her mother's favorite, and a note: "Emma, plant these with love. Keep growing. Max knows the next place. Trust him." Emma's tears fell and she clutched the seeds, the note's words sinking in, a call to nurture her own growth, to honor her mother by living fully. Max leaned against her, his warmth steadying her, and she whispered, "You're showing me how. To start again, aren't you?" She sat on the bench, the garden humming with life, and felt the stakes of this journey sharpen, not just to find her mother's clues, but to forgive herself for the years she'd let pass, to embrace the dreams Max was helping her rediscover. The sun dipped low, painting the roses gold, and Emma knew the journey was far from over, that Max would lead her to more truths, more chances to heal. She stood, the tin in her hand, and looked at Max, his eyes bright, ready to guide her forward, her heart full of love and a growing courage to face whatever came next. Emma stood in the community garden, the tin of marigold seeds clutched in her hand, the note's words: "Plant these with love. Keep growing. Max knows the next place. Trust him," echoing in her heart as the evening sun bathed the roses in gold. Max sat beside her, his golden fur catching the light, his eyes steady with the quiet purpose that had guided her through this journey, from the attic box to the lake, the library, the beach house, and now this garden, each clue a piece of her. Mother's love, urging her to reconnect with the dreams she'd let fade. The weight of her guilt, for drifting from her mother's memory, for shelving her own aspirations, pressed against her, but Max's presence, his unwavering loyalty, was a lifeline, pulling her toward healing. She knelt, pressing her hand to his warm fur, and whispered, "You're taking me somewhere big, aren't you, buddy? One last step?" Max's tail wagged faintly, his nose nudging her, and Emma felt a surge of anticipation, tempered by a flicker of fear. What if this next clue is the end? What if it asks more of me than I can give? The note pointed to growth, to planting seeds, and Emma sensed the next place would be a culmination, a moment her mother had planned to tie all the clues together. She stood, tucking the tin into her canvas bag with the quilt, locket, bear, star chart, photo album, journal, and VHS tape, and led Max back to the car, his leash trailing as he trotted with purpose. The note hadn't named the next place, but the word growing sparked a memory. The backyard of their old family home, where her mother had kept a small herb garden, teaching Emma to tend basil and mint, Max digging holes with joyful abandon. Emma's heart raced. The house was sold years ago, but Max's steady gaze convinced her it was the right destination, the place where growth began. She texted Liam, heading to the old house. "Max is leading me to Mom's herb garden, I think." "It's the last clue." Liam's reply was swift. "Trust Max, he's got you. Let me know what you find." Emma spread the quilt over the passenger seat, Max settling onto it, and drove toward the house. The road familiar despite the years, each turn stirring memories of childhood drives with her mother singing, Max's head out the window. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The oak-lined streets and clapboard houses still cozy, and Emma parked across from the old house, its shutters now red instead of blue, a pang of nostalgia hitting her. Max leapt down, his steps slow but eager, and trotted to the front gate, his nose sniffing the air, his tail wagging with certainty. Emma hesitated, unsure if the new owners would welcome her, but Max's insistence pushed her forward, and she knocked on the door, her heart pounding. A woman in her 50s answered, her smile warm, and Emma explained, "I grew up here. My dog led me back. I think my mom left something in the backyard. Would it be okay to look?" The woman, Clara, nodded, her eyes softening. "Of course, I've seen that dog sitting by the gate sometimes like he's visiting. Go ahead. Take your time." Emma thanked her and followed Max through the gate, the backyard unfolding like a memory. The herb garden's still there, though smaller, its mint and basil thriving under a new hand. Max didn't pause, heading straight for a corner near the garden, where a weathered bird bath stood, its base surrounded by clover. He sat, his paw tapping the ground, and Emma knelt, her hands brushing away dirt, to reveal a buried metal box, its lid engraved with a sprig of mint. Her breath caught, and she pried it open, Max pressing close, his warmth steadying her trembling hands. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name, a small leather notebook, and a folded letter, all in her mother's handwriting. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she opened the envelope first, the letter unfolding to reveal a message that hit like a tide. "Emma, if you're here, Max brought you home. This is my last gift, a seed for your heart. Open the notebook. Share our love with the world. I'll always be with you." Emma clutched the letter, her sobs breaking free, and Max leaned against her, his whine soft, his tail wagging faintly. She opened the notebook, its pages filled with her mother's stories, sketches and poems, many about Emma's childhood, her dreams of writing, Max's antics, each one a call to create, to share, to live boldly. The final page held a note. "Emma, you're a storyteller. Write our story. Let Max's love inspire others. Plant the seeds of our joy." Emma's heart swelled, the guilt she'd carried melting into purpose, her mother's belief in her, a light that hadn't dimmed. She thought of the journey, the locket's photo, the star chart's constellations, the journal's dreams, the tape's voice, each clue building to this moment. A climactic gift, not just of memory, but of direction. A call to honor her mother by living the life she'd envisioned for her. Max rested his head on her knee, his eyes bright, and Emma laughed through tears. "You did it, buddy. You brought me to her last wish." Clara approached, offering a glass of iced tea, and Emma shared the story, her voice shaky but clear. "My mom left these for me. Max led me to them. She wanted me to write, to share our love." Clara's eyes glistened and she nodded. "Your mother sounds like she knew you'd find your way. That dog made sure of it." Emma sat under the bird bath, the notebook in her lap, and read the stories, each one a spark, igniting her dormant dream of writing. She thought of the years she'd spent avoiding this part of herself, the fear of failure, the weight of grief. But Max's journey had shown her she was ready, that her mother's love, and his, would carry her forward. The sun dipped low, painting the garden gold, and Emma felt the stakes of the journey resolve, not in an ending but in a beginning, a commitment to plant the seeds her mother had left, to grow into the woman she was meant to be. She stood, the box in her hands, and looked at Max, his tail wagging, ready to lead her home, her heart full of gratitude for the dog who'd turned a nip in the attic into a path to her mother's final gift. Emma sat under the bird bath in the old family backyard, the metal box open on her lap. Its contents her mother's letter, notebook of stories, and the call to write our story. Let Max's love inspire others, resting like seeds ready to bloom. Max lay beside her, his golden fur warm against her leg, his eyes half closed but alert, as if he knew this moment was the heart of their journey, the culmination of every clue he'd led her to, from the attic box to the lake, library, beach, house, garden, and now this quiet corner of her childhood. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the herb garden, and Emma's heart felt full, not just with the love her mother had woven into each hidden treasure, but with a newfound purpose, a resolve to honor her mother's wish by reclaiming her dream of writing, a dream she'd buried under years of grief and doubt. She stroked Max's fur, whispering, "You brought me here, buddy. You showed me what Mom wanted me to be." Max's tail thumped softly, his nose nudging her hand, and Emma laughed, tears brimming. The guilt she'd carried for drifting from her mother's memory, melting into gratitude for the dog who'd guided her back. Clara, the homeowner, had retreated to the house, leaving Emma and Max in the garden's quiet. And Emma opened the notebook again, its pages filled with her mother's stories, poems about Max's puppy antics, sketches of Emma's childhood dreams, each one a spark, igniting her own creativity. She thought of the journey's clues, the locket's photo, the star chart's constellations, the journal's letters, the tape's voice, the seeds of growth, each one a step toward this moment, a call to share the love that had shaped her. Emma's fingers traced the final note, "Plant the seeds of our joy," and she knew her mother wasn't just asking her to remember, she was asking her to create, to weave their story into something that could touch others, just as Max's loyalty had touched her. She stood, the box in her hands, and led Max back to the car, his steps slow but steady, the quilt spread over the passenger seat for his comfort. The drive home was peaceful, the twilight sky streaked with pink, and Emma's mind buzzed with ideas, a vision of a blog where she'd share her mother's stories, Max's journey and her own rediscovery, a space to plant the seeds her mother had left. She glanced at Max, his head resting on the console, and whispered, "You're the hero of this story, you know that, you made it all possible." Max huffed, his tail wagging faintly, and Emma smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years, the weight of grief transformed into a quiet strength. At home, she set the metal box on the kitchen table, its contents joining the canvas bag's treasures, and began to act, pulling out her laptop to create a blog, her fingers trembling with excitement as she typed the first post, a simple introduction. "This is the story of Max, my golden retriever, who led me back to my mother's love, and the journey that changed me." She wrote late into the night. Max curled at her feet, describing the attic box, the locket's photo, the starlit clearing, the beach house tape, each moment vivid and alive, her mother's voice woven through every word. She uploaded photos, the quilt stitches, the journal's pages, the marigold seeds, and a snapshot of Max, his graying muzzle proud, his eyes bright with love. The act of writing felt like planting, each sentence a seed, and Emma sensed her mother smiling, her belief in Emma's storytelling finally taking root. She paused, reading over her words, and felt a shift. The girl who dreamed of writing stories wasn't gone, she was here, shaped by loss but strengthened by love, ready to share her voice. The next morning, Emma called Liam, her voice bubbling. "With energy, I started a blog. I'm writing Mum's stories, Max's journey, everything. It's what she wanted." Liam listened, his pride clear. "That's incredible, Em. You're doing it. Max knew you could." They talked for an hour, reminiscing about their mother, Max's puppy days, and Emma promised to send him the blog link, eager for him to see the story unfolding. She spent the day organizing the clues, scanning the journal's pages, digitizing the tape's footage, each task a step toward sharing her mother's legacy. Max stayed close, his presence a constant, and Emma marveled at how His nip in the attic had sparked this transformation, turning her grief into a celebration of love. She posted another entry, this one about the beach house, her mother's voice on the tape, and felt a thrill as comments trickled in, strangers moved by Max's loyalty, by the bond between mother and daughter. The blog became a ritual, a place, to plant seeds of joy, and Emma found herself writing not just about the past but about her dreams, stories inspired by her mother's poems, ideas for a book about Max's journey, each word a step toward the life her mother had envisioned. She took Max for a walk that evening, the neighborhood quiet, the spring air soft with lilac, and let him lead, his leash loose as he sniffed familiar paths. She thought of the guilt she'd carried, the years she'd let her mother's memory fade, and realized it wasn't failure, it was survival. And now, with Max's help, she was thriving, her mother's love a foundation for growth. They paused by a park, Max settling onto the grass and Emma sat beside him, the quilt around her shoulders, the locket around her neck, its weight a reminder of the journey's gifts. She looked at Max, his eyes reflecting the streetlights, and whispered, "You changed everything, buddy. You brought me back to myself." Max leaned against her, his warmth a hug, and Emma felt complete, not because the journey was over, but because it had given her a new beginning, a purpose rooted in love. The blog was just the start, a way to share their story, but it was also a promise to keep growing, to write, to live boldly, as her mother had always hoped. The night was still, the stars faint above, and Emma knew her mother was with her, in Max's steady heart, in the words she was writing, in the life she was building. She stood, Max rising with her, and walked home, her steps light, her heart full, ready to face whatever came next, knowing Max's love and her mother's would always guide her. Emma sat on the front porch of her small craftsman home, the patchwork quilt wrapped around her shoulders, its faded stitches soft against her skin as the evening breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs. Max lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, his graying muzzle warm and familiar, his slow breaths a gentle rhythm that anchored her to this quiet moment. The sky deepened to twilight, stars beginning to peek through the fading light, and Emma's heart felt full, a warmth that radiated from the journey Max had led her on, from the attic's cardboard box to the final clue in their old backyard. Each step a thread weaving her back to her mother's love and her own rediscovered purpose. The canvas bag sat inside, brimming with treasures, the locket, bear, star chart, photo album, journal, VHS tape, marigold seeds, and the notebook of her mother's stories, each one a testament to the love Max had guarded, a love now blooming, in the blog Emma had created, where she shared their story with the world. She stroked Max's fur, her fingers lingering behind his ears, and whispered, "You did it, buddy. You brought her back to me." Max's tail thumped faintly, his eyes half closed but bright, and Emma smiled, tears brimming, the weight of the past 5 years, the grief, the guilt, transformed into a quiet joy, a certainty that her mother was with her, in the stars above, in Max's steady heart, in the words she was writing. The porch creaked under her weight, the same porch where she'd sat as a child, her mother beside her, Max a tumbling puppy chasing fireflies, and Emma felt time collapse, the past and present merging in this perfect, fleeting moment. She thought of the blog's latest post, a reflection on the backyard's final clue, her mother's notebook urging her to write, to share their love, and the comments that poured in, strangers moved by Max's loyalty, by the bond that transcended loss. The act of writing had become her sanctuary, a way to plant the seeds her mother had left. And Emma felt her dreams stirring, not just to share this story, but to write more, to craft books, to weave tales that carried the same warmth her mother's stories held. She leaned back, the locket around her neck catching the porch light, its tiny photo a reminder of the journey's start, Max's nip in the attic, his fierce protection of a box she'd nearly discarded. That moment felt like a lifetime ago, yet it was only weeks, and Emma marveled at how Max had changed her, guiding her through clues that weren't just objects, but invitations to remember, to grow, to live boldly. She thought of Liam's pride when she'd shared the blog, his voice warm over the phone. "You're doing it, Em. Mum would be so proud, and she knew he was right. Her mother's love was in every step, every word, every wag of Max's tail. The neighborhood was quiet, the distant hum of crickets blending with the rustle of leaves, and Emma let her mind wander, replaying the journey's moments, the starlit clearing at Lake Willow, the dance studio's hidden album, the beach house, tape, each one a gift Max had delivered with unwavering faith. She looked down at him, his fur silvered by age, his body slower but his spirit as bright as ever, and felt a pang of tenderness, knowing his years were finite, yet his love had already left an eternal mark. She whispered, "You're my hero, Max, always will be," and he huffed, his head settling deeper into her lap, as if content to simply be there, his job done. Emma's fingers traced the quilt stitches, each one her mother's handiwork, and she thought of the marigold seeds, still unplanted, waiting for the right moment, a symbol of the growth she was embracing. She imagined planting them in her own backyard, a small garden to honor her mother. Max sprawled nearby, his tail wagging as she worked the soil. The image brought a smile, and she realized this was what her mother had wanted, not just to be remembered, but to inspire Emma to live fully, to create, to love without fear. The stars grew brighter, and Emma tilted her head back, tracing constellations she'd learned as a child, Orion's belt, the Big Dipper, her mother's voice in her ear, "Keep looking up, Emma." She felt that voice now, not as memory, but as presence, a warmth that wrapped around her as surely as the quilt. Max shifted, his whine soft, and Emma followed his gaze to the sky, a single star twinkling brighter as if winking at them. She laughed, tears spilling, and whispered, "That's you, Mum, watching us, isn't it?" The breeze stirred, cool and gentle, and Emma felt her mother's love in it, a confirmation that this journey, though complete, was also a beginning, a foundation for the life she'd build. She thought of the blog, the stories yet to write, the book she'd started outlining, a tribute to Max's journey, to her mother's love, and the comments from readers who'd found hope in her words, proof that she was already planting seeds of joy, just as her mother had asked. Max let out a soft grunt, his body relaxing, and Emma leaned down, pressing her cheek to his fur, her heart full of gratitude for the dog who'd turned a moment of startling fierceness into a path of healing. The night was still, the stars a canopy above, and Emma knew this moment was the closing of their quest, not an end but a pause, a breath before the next chapter. She stood, helping Max to his feet, his joints stiff but his tail wagging, and led him inside, the quilt draped over her arm, the locket warm against her chest. They settled in the living room, Max curling up on his bed, Emma on the couch, her laptop open to the blog, a new post forming in her mind, a thank you to Max, to her mother, to the love that had carried her here. She typed the first line, "This is for Max, who showed me that love never fades," and paused, looking at him, his eyes meeting hers, a silent pact sealed long ago. The house was quiet, the world outside still, and Emma felt at peace, her mother's presence in every corner, her love eternal in Max's steady heart. She closed the laptop, content to rest in this moment, knowing the story would continue, in her words, in her life, in the seeds she'd plant. She whispered, "Good night, buddy, good night, Mom," and Max sighed, his tail giving one last thump, the stars outside watching over them, a family bound by love, forever.